Welcome to another episode of Meet a Senator. Today I have the great pleasure of having Senator John Coghill with me. I know many of you will recognize the Coghill name, and you will get to meet Senator Coghill today. So welcome, Senator Coghill, for joining me. I appreciate you being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you. I appreciate it. I enjoy working with you.
Senator Coghill, tell us about your district. You represent more than the interior. Tell us about the scope of your district.
So they have to label it Fairbanks North Pole because it's both. I have North Pole, which is a small community, kind of eastern part of Fairbanks. And in that area, I've got kind of the bedroom district to Fort Wainwright and Eielson Air Force Base. So, and it's a small community, but it's a large geographical area. And then I have the Fairbanks area. I go right around Fairbanks town, which is almost all the bedroom district to Fairbanks proper and the University of Alaska. So they're very, very different. And as a matter of fact, I have a Republican House member and a Democrat House member. So it makes it unique in that regard.
I'll say, yeah. So you've had an interesting pathway that brings you to this day. Tell us about your pathway to the legislature. You know, what in your early years maybe prepared you for this job?
Well, prepared me for legislative work was primarily my dad, who was a Republican legislator in the territorial days, was on the Constitutional Convention, first state legislature in the Senate. He was a longtime Republican chairman, finally lieutenant governor, and then he retired. And so about 5 years after he retired, one of my House members decided to run for the Senate and vacated the House seat. And I just happened to be on the Republican committee at that point that was tasked to go find somebody to run. And they said, Coghill, that's a good name, why don't you run? And I was a pastoral worker at that time. I taught in a private school. I did things like teaching in the small private school, family counseling, working in the jails. So I did a lot of work like that. So I would say, well, I don't do that. And they would say, oh, you want me to do it, but you're not willing to do it. And by the way, Coghill, that's a good name. So I kind of got drafted. So I went to my wife and asked her, you know, should we do this? You can say no, we don't have to do this. And she got excited about it. I went to my pastor, who had been my boss for the last 15 years. And I said, well, you could veto this. I don't have to do this, but what do you think? And he said, go for it. So we ran for office. I spent 10 years in the House. And my last year in the House, I was thinking, it's time to change. And I'm a praying man, so I was looking for divine guidance. So I chose not to sign up for the House. That summer, my senator stepped out to work for the governor, and they wanted somebody to appoint for 1 year. And so I went from being the rules chairman in the House to being in the minority in the Senate. So it was quite a change. And it was an answer to a prayer that I had been making for a year. What's next? So I had to kind of in a humorous way say, okay, God, are you sure? Is that really the answer? But the commitment was to run for a 2-year Senate seat after that. While redistricting was being worked out. So I ran for that 2-year seat thinking that would be it. Then I got combined with an incumbent Democrat. Joe Thomas and I were both incumbents, and I figured the people of Fairbanks, North Pole area deserved at least the choice between a more liberal and a more conservative guy. And I got the nod. And that actually happened again this last time. I got paired up with the mayor of the North Star Borough. And since my district is almost evenly split, I figured, you know, there's a good chance I won't make it, but at least I get a choice. So I ran for the seat. Probably the unique thing is I've always run for a seat, not against somebody. And I think that paid out in both accounts.
Very good. So you've talked about your family history. I mean, really, a legacy passed down from your father
Sure.
that you've picked up. You know, a lot of people might look at that and think, well, you must have had a very favored upbringing, very elite upbringing. Tell me about your upbringing, the kinds of work that you've done. I mean, not just legislature, I mean
Sure.
regular work.
So my family are merchants. And so I grew up in a merchant family. We had a general store in Nenana. It was hardware, groceries, propane, and in my youth, Dad decided to branch out and become a fuel oil distributor. So we still had the grocery store, and then pretty soon I became a helper in my teen years of this fuel oil distributorship, which then began to move barrels. As soon as I was old enough to drive, I was driving a tank truck. And we ran a service station because we had a fuel company. You get a service station. And then we had a service center that did truck repairs. So I've learned everything from stocking shelves, making hamburger in the butcher shop, to changing tires, transmissions, and then doing bookwork in the office, accounting. For example, every day we would, before computers, everything was on a spreadsheet. So I tallied spreadsheets until I was blue in the face. But my dad would say to me, see that tank truck out there? That tank truck has to deliver 3 times in a day to justify your job. So I was pretty well aware from the grocery store and the fuel oil on how a dollar is actually made and how a service is actually delivered up until the time I joined the military. And so I went into the Air Force for 5 years, came back to work with Dad after 5 years, and was in line to work the business and take the business. But the more authority I got, the less Dad and I saw eye to eye. It was his company. So I bailed out. I went to work doing construction work and selling construction equipment, doing yards, building houses, and loved about 10 years of just running backhoes, running graders, running tractors, just real construction. I did everything and anything I could get my hands on. I was a good builder. From my time in my youth, everything we did in Nenana for our business, we had to build ourselves. So I did foundations, and I did windows, and I did roofs, and I did trusses. So when it came time for me to work in the construction industry, I just had a pretty good working knowledge. And I was able to do everything from concrete cutting to building houses.
Wow, that's pretty cool. You know, a real Alaskan background,
Yeah.
right? Building stuff. So here in the legislature, you've been the chair of a Judiciary Committee for a long time. Many of your years here. How many years altogether?
So I've been in the legislature 20 years, and 18 of those years I've been on the Judiciary Committee. And so 1 year I stepped off so that a new appointed member could get on, but I was still a significant part because I was a majority leader and the part of the committee. So it's been an interest of mine down through the years. I'll tell you what the 2 primary interests of mine was one, I'm a pro-life guy. And that is a legal challenge like you wouldn't believe in Alaska. It's just a legal challenge, and I wanted to be in on that discussion. Then the other thing is, our rules between us and the federal government are somewhat arcane. We have our statehood compact, we have ANILCA, we have ANCSA, and many court cases along the Ninth Circuit line. And I wanted to be a part of the discussion on how to help Alaska plow out its ability to get on access to its lands. So getting on the resource committee was tough because it was always about oil tax and things like that. So working that from the judiciary became pretty much my ability to help Alaska plow out its access to its lands and the things that are legal entanglements between us and the federal government.
So that brings up that committee that you sat on called CACFA.
Yes.
Citizens Advisory Council on Federal Lands.
Federal area.
Federal areas. So that must have really meshed with, of course, your father's history.
Yes.
and the writing of the state constitution. But talk more a little bit about CACFA.
So when Dad was in Lieutenant Governor, he worked on the RS 2477, which is all the trails and access, whether they were mail trails or commerce trails. So that was in my background. And then so when the Citizens Advisory Commission on federal areas wanted somebody from the legislature, I rose my hand and volunteered. And you were kind of a non-voting member, but you were a part of a citizens advisory council, basically, that was to advise the state governor, the legislature, and the federal government on things that were concerns to access to federal lands, the rights that ANILCA had guaranteed that sometimes got lost in the weeds. So I became an active part of that with many other legislators. But it's something that I began to work very deeply in. And it's given me a good relationship with Senator Murkowski. The other Senator Murkowski, when he was in, I've written letters to presidents, to legislators, to working with other state legislators, mostly like Idaho or Montana, places like that where there's a lot of federal areas in Nevada. So it was my ability to work closely with Alaskans and work in the federal area issue with other states that have large federal land issues. It was a lot of fun. And Alaska, if you think about it, Alaska is unique in that very few states have a specific federal act that is state-specific. We have ANILCA and ANCSA. Certainly our statehood compact, but our statehood compact is seen through those documents that are congressional acts specifically about Alaska. So many states don't understand that, and many people in the state don't understand that. Many federal area managers don't understand that. And it's important that we understand it and then stand up for what is our privilege.
You know, one of the things I really appreciate is how you endeavor to pass that baton, that knowledge on to young people. You really enjoy talking to young people.
It's been both a blessing and a joy to watch. I've enlisted many legislators, interns in my office. And I've actually hired people with the specific intent of getting them up to speed on the special Alaska acts, because it's going to be important the next generation carries us on. We're dealing with battles that are 100 years old in Alaska, and they're not going to go away. So they're a management style of how to continually work with the federal government, but not to make sure that Alaska isn't overrun by federal regulators. So it's going to be important that the next generation gets it.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It is such an honor to serve with you, and
Likewise.
Certainly huge respect for the work that your father did the generation before you.
Yes.
So thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.